Thank you for joining today's webinar on Children's System Aligned Home and Community-Based Services. This is our second service-specific webinar, and today we'll be focusing on pre-vocational employment and supported employment services. Before we get going, as usual, we want to just quickly run through our introduction and housekeeping. My name is Boris Vilgorin. I'm with MICTEC. And today I'm also joined by our state partners who will be participating in today's webinar, both as presenters, but also will be involved in our Q&A session that we hope to have towards the end of this presentation. As always, the slides and the recording will be posted at the mictec.org website. So after today's webinar, we will be posting that. And also, as a reminder, the information and timelines that are presented today are current as of the date of the presentation. And of course, this presentation is not an official document, but for full details, please always refer to the provider in billing manual. I also would invite individuals to please use the chat option to chat your questions in throughout the presentation. We will be gathering those, as I mentioned, and then after our formal presentation, we'll be trying to get to as many questions as possible. So please feel free throughout the presentation to chat those questions in. So today's agenda, we will go through an HCBS overview of key concepts. As I mentioned, today we're focusing on pre-vocational employment, supported employment, and HCBS eligibility and crosswalk of services. The HCBS overview of key concepts. So the overview of the timeline for HCBS services are as follows. On April 1st, 1915C Children waiver is effective, and the former 1915C waiver will no longer be active. Excuse me, pending CMS approval. All children enrolled in the former Children's 1915C waiver program must be transitioned to the 1950C Children's waiver. So what are those former waivers? They're OCFS, Bridges to Health, B2H, SED waiver, OCFS, B2H, DD, OCFS, B2H, MedF, or medically fragile, OMH, SED, OPWDD, Care at Home, 4 waiver, and DOH Care at Home, 1-2 waiver. Children's HCBS waiver will be billed fee-for-service for all children enrolled in the Children's waiver. And this is, again, referring to April 1. On July 1st, 3-year phase-in of level of care expansion begins, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And on October 1st of this year, 2015C, the waiver service carved into managed care. So what does that mean? On October 1st, if the child is enrolled in Medicaid managed care plan, as a provider, you will be billing managed care directly. There also will continue to be children that are not enrolled in Medicaid managed care, and for those children, you will continue to bill fee-for-service. So some of the key concepts, again, for HCBS and new Children and Family Treatment Support Services, CFTSS, they are different and have different requirements. We know that as we talk to providers, there seems to be sometimes confusion, or folks kind of use those interchangeably, or at least how individuals will get those services. So just wanted to make sure everybody understands those have different requirements, processes, and paths to care, and so that's important to keep in mind. Providers must be designated to provide these services. There is a lot of built flexibility to allow for creativity. In the waiver capacity and slots as of April 1st, all current slots will be combined and will remain the same until July 1st, when capacity expansion begins. For more information, on capacity and slot management will be forthcoming. The core principles of HCBS I don't think these are surprising to anybody. They're child-centered, family-focused, community-based. They're multi-system. They're culturally competent, and they should be least restrictive and least intrusive services. The settings for HCBS are allowable settings in compliance with Medicaid regulations and the home and community-based settings final rule. Will exhibit the characteristics and qualities most often articulated by individual, child, youth, and family caregiver as key determinants of independence and community integration. Services should be offered in the setting least restrictive, as I've mentioned, for desired outcomes, including the most integrated home or community-based settings, where the beneficiary lives, works, engages in services, and or socializes, while remaining inclusive of those in the family and caregiver network. Family is broadly defined. That's another question we get a lot, and can include families created through birth, foster care, adoption, or a self-created unit. So billing for HCBS between April 1st and September 30th will go directly to fee-for-service for all children enrolled in the Children's Waiver. So again, children HCBS waiver will be billed fee-for-service for all children enrolled in the Children's Waiver. So some basics around billing 101. When we start billing managed care, especially on October 1st, and be specific, Medicaid managed care. If a child, again, is in Medicaid managed care plan, you would need to bill Medicaid managed care plan directly starting October 1st. The Medicaid managed care plans will be required to pay government rates, also known as Medicaid fee-for-service rates, for at least 24 months from the date the service was included in the Medicaid managed care benefit package, or however long New York state mandates. In order to bill Medicaid managed care, you need to be in network. And when we talk about in network, that means you need to have a contract and be credentialed with them. If you're not sure how to reach out or who to contact at Medicaid Managed Care, at MCTAC website, we have a tool called the Managed Care Plan Matrix. That matrix provides all the contact information for all the Medicaid Managed Care plans throughout the state. It's an interactive tool. And at the end of this presentation, we have resources and links to this. So when the presentation is available, you'll be able to link to the matrix tool. And of course, all designated agencies must be enrolled as Medicaid provider agencies. If a child, again, is not in Medicaid managed care plan, you will continue billing fee-for-service even after October 1st. So let's jump right into the services that we want to cover today. The first service we'll cover is pre-vocational service. And what are pre-vocational services? Well, their services are intended to develop and teach general skills. Some examples include, but again, not limited, ability to communicate effectively with supervisors, coworkers, and customers, generally accepted community workplace conduct and dress, ability to follow direction, workplace problem-solving skills and strategies, proper use of job-related equipment, in general workplace safety. Pre-vocational services may include voluntary work, such as learning and training activities that prepare a person for entry into the paid workforce. Again, the definition and the name is pre-vocational, so really getting somebody ready to be fully employed. So what a pre-vocational service continues? Pre-vocational services include activities that are not primarily directed at teaching skills to perform a particular job, but at underlying habilitative goals. Attention span, as an example, motor skills, interpersonal relations with coworkers and supervisors are just some of the examples that are associated with building skills necessary to perform work and optimally to perform competitive integrated employment. Excuse me, activities could include, but again, not limited. So this is just some things could be part of the services. Resume writing, interview techniques, role play, and job application completion. Exploring career options, facilitating appropriate work habits, acceptable job behaviors, and learning job production requirements. It could also be assisting in identifying community service opportunities that could lead to paid employment, helping youth to complete college, technical school, or other applications to continue formal education and training, and helping youth to apply for financial aid or scholarship opportunities. Why offer pre-vocational services? Well, individual designed to prepare youth ages 14 or older to engage in paid work, voluntary work, or career exploration. Not job-specific, as was mentioned, but rather are geared towards facilitating success in any work environment for youth whose disabilities do not permit them access to other pre-vocational services. To enable each participant to attain the highest level of work in the most integrated setting and with a job match to the participant's interests, strengths, priorities, abilities, and capabilities, while following applicable federal wage guidelines from the U.S. Department of Labor. Pre-vocational employment example. So one of the ways we would like to convey some of this information is to, and hopefully this will be helpful, is to kind of provide an example of how this could play out concretely with some of the individuals you serve. So an example we have Susie, who's 17, and her pre-vocational employment provider engages her in exploring opportunities for college, including considering a technical school and completing a college application. The pre-vocational employment provider also helps Susie create a resume and explore opportunities for a part-time job to help finance her college pursuit. So again, this is just an example, and there's many other opportunities and ways you can work with individuals in providing pre-vocational services. The modality of pre-vocational could be provided one-to-one or in a group settings of up to 2 or 3 participants. So again, you do have the flexibility here to work with individual directly or in a small group settings. There are some limitations and exclusions. Documentation is maintained that the service is not available under a program funded under Section 110 of the Rehabilitation Act. Pre-vocational services will not be provided to an HCBS participant if the special education and related services that are otherwise available to individual through a local education agency under the provision of the IDEA, the vocational rehabilitation services that are otherwise available to the individual through a program funded under Access VR, or vocational services that are provided in facility-based work that are not in integrated setting in the general community workforce. So again, those are the 3 areas where the HCBS pre-vocational will not be provided. Some of the staff qualifications, and these are minimum staff qualifications. So minimum, the qualification of a staff who's providing the service requires an associate degree with 1 year human service experience. The preference really is a bachelor's degree with 1 year experience in human services working with children and youth. We also have the supervisory qualifications to review. Again, there's a minimum requirement for a supervisor to have a bachelor's degree with 3 years experience in human services, but a preferred approach is to have a master's degree with at least 1 year experience in human services working with children and or youth. So that was the pre-vocational services. We're now going to move into the supported employment component and review the supported employment services. So what is supported employment? Supported employment provides assistance to participants with disability as they perform in a work setting. Services may include any combination of the following: vocational, job-related discovery or assessment, person-centered employment planning, job placement, job development, negotiation with prospective employers, job analysis, job carving, training and system instruction, job coaching, benefit support, training, and so forth. As you can see, there's quite a few things that the service may include. So again, as I've mentioned earlier, this is not an official document. There's a lot in the manual, so strongly recommend folks take advantage of it And as you can see, again, there's actually quite a few things you can be providing or the services may include. The supported employment service may also include services and supports that assist the participant in achieving self-employment. So that's another area where you can work with individuals around. Supported employment services components. Those components include the following: supervision and training that are not job-related, intensive ongoing support, transportation to and from the job site, interface with employers regarding the individual disabilities and needs related to his or her healthcare issues, other activities needed to sustain paid work, and that could be an employment assessment, job placement, and or adaptive assisted equipment necessary for employment, job finding and development training in work behaviors, assessing the interest and fit of an individual for particular job opportunities, staff work with employer and job sites, preparing them to be able to make necessary and reasonable accommodations, on-site support for the individual as they learn specific job tasks, monitoring through on-site observation, through communication with job supervisor and employers. Again, these are the components that could be included and are part of, or included, I should say, in a supported employment service. Why offer supported employment? Well, providers can offer supported employment as ongoing support to participants who, because of their disability, need intensive ongoing support to obtain and maintain an individual job in competitive or customized employment or, again, self-employment. Individually designed to prepare youth with disabilities, and when we say youth, we mean ages 14 or older, to engage in paid work. The outcome of the service is sustained paid employment or at or above the minimum wage in an integrated setting in a general workforce, in a job that meets personal and career goals. Again, as an example here, just like we talked about in pre-vocational, Susie, just continuing with Susie's example, just obtained a part-time job working in the department store. Her supported employment provider meets with her supervisor to discuss Susie's specific workforce needs based on her healthcare needs. And again, so this is a situation where the individual or the provider is meeting with the supervisor of the department store to discuss Susie's needs based on her healthcare. The modality for this particular service, this service can only be provided on individual basis through a face-to-face intervention. And again, it's important to distinction between the two services. So for this one, it's face-to-face and only on individual basis. There's also limitations and exclusions here. Medicaid funds may not be used to defray the expenses associated with starting up or operating a business. So that's an important piece to keep in mind when we're talking about employment service. Supported employment service will not be provided to an HCBS participant if, again, special education and related services that is otherwise available, as previously under IDEA, vocational rehabilitation services that are otherwise available to the individual program funded under Section 110 of the Rehabilitation Act. The supported employment does not include facility-based or other similar types of vocational services furnished in specialized facilities that are not part of general workforce. Supported employment does not include payment for supervision, training, support, and adaptation typically available to other workers without disability finding similar positions in the business, and supported employment does not include voluntary work. Such volunteer learning and unpaid training activities that prepare a person for entry into a paid workforce are addressed through a pre-vocational. So when you are referring to voluntary, those could fall under, again, as mentioned before, under pre-vocational, but would not fall under the supported employment. And Medicaid funding cannot be claimed for incentive payments, subsidies, or related vocational training expenses, such as the following: incentive payments made to an employer to encourage or subsidize employers' participation in supported employment, payments that are passed through to users of supported employment services. So again, important to keep in mind these limitations and exclusions. They are very important that you follow those. There are staff qualifications here as well. The minimum for this service is qualifications, again, as an associate degree with 1 year human service experience, but the preference is the bachelor degree with 1 year experience. For supervisors, the minimum is a bachelor's degree with 3 years experience in human services, and the preference is the qualification of a master's, right? So you have the minimum of a bachelor's, but preferred of master's degree. The bachelor's degree is with 3 years and the master's with 1. Again, this is the qualifications for the supervisors. So with this overview of services and the general overview, I'm going to pass this presentation and the ball to our state partners who will take us through the HCBS eligibility and crosswalk of services.
Thank you. This is Alyssa Altschul from the Office of Mental Health. The next set of slides are actually slides that are included in each of the 5 parts of this HCBS webinar series, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on them, but we will walk through them briefly. We're just arrow down. Okay. All right, so HCBS eligibility, we do just want to remind folks that in order to get this package of services, children need to be found eligible and then need to be enrolled in the consolidated waiver. There is going to be a webinar next Wednesday that's going to walk through all of the information related to level of care eligibility, but in short, children would have to meet 3 components of eligibility. That's target population, risk factors, and functional criteria. And this is, there's a tool that's housed in the UAS that also houses the CANS New York that would be used to determine a child's eligibility for the HCBS consolidated waiver. Okay. So we get a lot of questions about who's responsible for what when it comes to HCBS. There are some differences in the new consolidated waiver from the existing children's waivers today. So determining eligibility would be the responsibility of the health home care manager, the state designated independent entity, which is referred to as CES, the Child and Youth Evaluation Service, and then in some circumstances, the DDROs for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Establishment of frequency, scope, and duration, which is a required component of a plan of care in order to get HCBS, would be determined by the provider of that service, and that provider would work with the health home care manager, the child, and the family to make a recommendation for frequency, scope, and duration based on the individual needs of that child and family and their goals. So the next set of slides really just show the crosswalk from the existing children's waivers to the new HCBS array or Children and Family Treatment and Support Services, because as a reminder, we're making sure that none of the services from the existing waivers are lost. They all crosswalk to a new service package, whether that's HCBS or CFTSS. And the goal there is to just ensure that all children who are accessing services in the waivers today continue to get services through the new authorities moving forward. So this first slide here just quickly outlines how each of the Care at Home 1 and 2 services crosswalk to new services. So in all cases, the case management or care coordination from the waivers crosswalks to Health Home. And of course, Health Home is an optional service, so if children opt out, they can get their HCBS through care management plan of care through the CES, but there are some differences there that are covered in other materials and webinars. Family education crosswalks to caregiver families and support services, and then the bereavement services, massage therapy, expressive therapy, from palliative care crosswalk to very similar services that are also called palliative care. And then home and vehicle modifications crosswalk to environmental mods and vehicle mods. The OCFS B2H waiver, the next few slides, it shows the crosswalk of services. B2H waiver is one of the waivers that has supported employment and pre-vocational services already. So those are direct crosswalks to these new definitions that are included in the new HCBS manual. I'll just spend a couple seconds on each slide so that you all can see how other services crosswalk. The OMH SED waiver is the other waiver that already includes pre-voc and supported employment. So we'll highlight that since those are the services that we're covering today. And again, just spending a few moments on each slide so that you can see how the services crosswalk. These will be posted on the MCTAC website, so you'll have access to these crosswalks, and these crosswalks are also included in other materials that are already available on the DOH website. This is the OPWDD waiver. It's been a few, the OPWDD care at home waiver, sorry. And then the next two slides, I know they're very hard to see. These slides are actually, or these grids are covered in the billing manual for the Children and Family Treatment and Support Services and HCBS, so you should go there for more information. But what I will highlight from this slide, as it relates to the services that we're covering today, is that for pre-vocational services and supported employment, there are some combinations with other services that are not allowable. So for those two services, if an individual is enrolled in an OMH ACT program or OMH PROS program, they cannot be also receiving pre-vocational services and supported employment because there are similar comparable services that are offered through ACT and PROS. And just to remind folks, ACT and PROS are adult-oriented programs that are available to individuals 18 and over. So, you know, to the extent that the child is 18 and over, we would just want to make sure that the care manager is having a conversation with that child and family about what services would best meet their needs, and just knowing that those aren't services that can be provided at the same time to the same child. And this one is just a continuation of that grid, but the rest of the services in this crosswalk are not necessarily applicable to today's webinar. So I'm going to turn it back over to MCTAC to walk through the remainder of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, Alyssa. Really helpful, and appreciate walking us through that. So again, just want to remind folks to continue chatting those questions by using the chat box as we go through our resources and information slides and towards the conclusion of the formal portion of the presentation. Again, just reminding, we will be posting these. You will be able to, you'll have access to all of these links as we move through this. And again, there are resources available, for example, like the provider list or the list of the New York State health homes by county and so forth. So again, they're very helpful and useful in many ways. As I mentioned earlier, regarding our tools at the MCTAC website, we have both the Plan Matrix tool, we have a billing tool. Also, another tool we folks are free to utilize is something called Output to Outcome database, and very helpful, especially as you think about different potentially using assessments and forms, you know, or outcomes. It's a very helpful tool. Also reminding individuals, as you know, if you have questions or comments or running into any issues, please utilize the appropriate email resources or mailboxes as we post here. There's one for DOH, OMH, OASIS, Health Home Specific, OCFS mailbox as well. So again, there's a lot of resources and places where you should really be taking advantage of, especially if you have questions or running into any trouble. And also with that, you also have our website, and also can always email mictac.info@nyu.edu as well, in addition to all of the other mailboxes. So at this point, I think we're going to turn attention to the Q&A portion of this presentation. I know we've been getting questions coming through. Again, I will encourage folks to continue sending them in, and I'll turn this back to Alyssa and our state partners.
Thank you, Boris. So we had some questions about the unit measures for these services. So folks have noticed that in the billing manual, the unit measure for pre-voc is hourly, while the unit limit for supported employment is 15 minutes. And there were questions about, is that intentional? Are we aware? And yes, we are aware, and we were building that structure to be consistent with how the services are billed and provided today in the waivers, and also to align with how they're provided in other similar services on the adult side. So that is true that there are different unit measures for pre-voc and supported employment. So there was a question about when the HCBS rates will be loaded in eMedNY, and will they be loaded for 4-1. So we don't have an answer to that question today, but there was mention about the CFTSS rates, and we wanted to let folks know that those should be up any time now. We expect within the next few days. So, we also want to note that for the CFTSS, and if for any reason the HCBS rates are not loaded on the date of implementation, the 90-day requirements that are associated with submitting claims do not start until the date that the rates are loaded. So that would not be held against any providers. We are just looking through the questions here.
Yeah, there was a question about will there be templates for notes for these services? Did you do that one? Okay. Will there be a template for notes for these services, or will the agency have to create their own? Yes, the agency will be responsible for creating their own notes, progress notes, and there will not be a format or a template for those provided.
The same with service plans.
Correct. The state will also not be issuing a template for what a service plan will look like. That will be the responsibility of the provider, and they will use their own standard templates for service planning as well, for service plan.
There was a question about because the managed care implementation isn't until 10-1, but these services go live 4-1, will the limits for the services still apply as of 4-1, or will they not apply until 10-1? So the answer is the limits are the limits whether the provider is billing fee-for-service or managed care for the child. So the limits would be in effect beginning 4-1, but as stated in the billing manual, if the service is medically necessary for the child and the child needs to go beyond those limits, exceptions could be made, but you would have to talk to either the state or the managed care plan in those scenarios.
Right, and just to verify that the services will be going live on 4-1, so from 4-1 to 9/30/19, services will be billed fee-for-service and not through managed care.
Yep.
So there'll be no requirement for a single contract or a contract with a managed care plan to be able to bill for those services during that time period.
There's a question, if a child is enrolled in Health Home, can they also be enrolled in PROS? And the answer is yes, an individual can be enrolled in health home care management and also be enrolled in a PROS program. And we would expect actually that those providers would be in communication about that individual's care as part of a, comprehensive care team.
There's a lot of questions in regards to the limitations and exclusions around the provision of pre-vocational and supported employment services to kids in HCBS who may also have an IEP and be eligible for comparable services through their IEP or through Access VR. Obviously for kids who do not have an IEP or who wouldn't be eligible for Access VR services, these services can be provided to those children. If children have an IEP, the question is, do they have vocational services on their IEP, or would they qualify for those such services on their IEP? In addition, the same would apply for Access VR. There are children who can get those services through their IEP, either in their classroom or in the community. The responsibility of the care manager would be to assure that that you're aware of those services and that the child could actually not get pre-vocational services or support employment services if they are getting them on their IEP or through Access VR. However, if there are aspects of pre-vocational services or support employment services that are not going to be covered through their IEP or through Access VR, you can verify that with the IEP, with the school, and verify that through Access VR. And if you were to get a letter that states that they cannot provide those services and they are denied those services, then those services can be provided. But you would need to make sure that there was some verification that they could not receive those services under their IEP or through Access VR if they do have an IEP or if they are eligible. And that would help to facilitate the provision of pre-voc and support employment through HCBS.
There's a question, are care managers establishing goals and handing kids off to HCBS providers? So the care manager should be working with the child and family in a person-centered way so that the child and family are the ones that are really driving what their goals are, but the care manager is part of that planning process. And talking to the child and family about what services can best meet the needs of that child, and then yes, they would be referring them to the appropriate services that are in line with that child's goals. Similarly, we were asked a question about how do you enroll a child into HCBS? So once they are determined eligible, how are they enrolled? And so we are going to be covering HCBS eligibility and enrollment in future webinars. So we do want to refer people to those, including the webinar on the 13th next week. We should note, it's important to note that there is, limited capacity for HCBS in the initial rollout of the consolidated waiver. And so a child does need to have a slot available in order to enroll in the HCBS waiver. And those slots are going to be managed differently than they're managed today. It's going to be a statewide capacity management process. And those slots are going to be shared across all of the populations that are being consolidated into the 1915C waiver. And we are also doing a webinar on capacity management, so we would definitely be talking about that in a lot more detail. There's a question, how does a family contact the independent entity, and who is this? So the independent entity, I'm going to flip back one slide, is called, 2 slides? No. 3 slides. The independent entity is called CES, the Child and Youth Evaluation Service. The contact information is here, but we do want to note that right now CES's role is really just for children who are in waiver today who are opting out of health home care management, but their full role as being available for those children and also to help with HCBS eligibility determinations does not begin until April 1st. but their number is here and the website is here. And we did do a Part 1 webinar on the role of the independent entity for transitioning children, and there will be another webinar on the role of CS and how to work with CS and refer to CS coming up this month.
I know there's a question regarding the individual service plan, and typically what would happen is that, similar to the earlier question, when somebody is referred to one of these services, they would be referred with a goal already chosen by the child and family and documented by the care manager or by the independent entity. And then you would create your service plan based on the goal that's provided, and you'd be looking at the different components of the service. For example, if it was pre-voc, which components of the service might help the person best to achieve their goal, and those are the services that you would provide, and you'd have a scope, duration, or frequency of each of those components of services. While it's under fee-for-service, of course, you're not going to be communicating with the managed care organization because they're not paying for the service yet. But once it does move into managed care, then you'll be having conversations with the managed care company regarding the ongoing authorization and continuance of the service.
We've gotten a couple managed care questions about when do we bill managed care. So to reiterate earlier in the presentation, billing to managed care for the HCBS services does not begin until 10/1/19. So all children that are receiving waiver services now in the existing waivers, and then as part of the consolidated waivers, starting in April, will be billing fee-for-service Medicaid. So there will be no managed care billing at that time. And then there was a question, will the state be issuing a prior auth and continued stay template? And that is in the HCBS manual. However, again, because these services aren't available in managed care until October, it wouldn't really be something that would be effective at this time until the services are covered by managed care plans. We also received a question about CFTSS billing, and while OLP, CPST, and PSR all are already covered by managed care plans, they are not yet covered for the SSI population. So there is a question about receiving denials from plans because a child has SSI. So if the child has SSI and a provider is billing for the CFTSS, OLP, PSR, or CPST, they should be billing fee-for-service. And the date that those services are going to be covered in managed care for the SSI population is 7/1. And so I understand that there was just a timeline announcement that went out that covers all the details about the services and when they're covered by managed care and when they're not. So we would refer you to that. It's also available on the DOH website on the Behavioral Health Transition page. We are just sorting through the questions that we've received, so just bear with us. Someone asked, can you explain what fee-for-service is? So when I say fee-for-service, I'm referring to many providers call this straight Medicaid
or regular Medicaid.
And that is billed through the eMedNI system. So that might be terminology that you'd be more familiar with. There's quite a few questions that are coming in about how do you transition 1915C kids to HCBS. So if you're a 1915C provider and you are having that question, you should reach out to the state, because we have been working very closely with those providers to make sure that children are transitioned and that those providers understand the steps that are needed to transition children. So those providers should contact the state and get your questions answered. We have the behavioral health transition mailbox. That is the first one listed on this slide, bh.transition@health.ny.gov. We have been doing a significant amount of work with those transitioning providers to ensure that children are transitioned and they don't experience any interruptions in care. There's a lot of questions that are coming in about other services such as respite and some of the other services that are covered in the manual. And I do just want to say that we're doing this 5-part webinar series to cover certain services during each webinar. But to the extent that you have questions about services that we already covered, like respite, which we covered last Friday, we can make sure to add those to our questions and answers document. Any questions that we can't get to today or that we don't have a full answer for, we'll make sure that we're getting an answer for and posting that as part of the Q&A that would go along with this webinar series. So there was a question, so the service provider is responsible to determine frequency, scope, and duration, but it's the care manager who's determining that the service is received and that the goals are to be worked on. So yes, the care manager would be working with the family to determine which services are most appropriate, but the actual provider of the service would be the one that would be making the recommendation for frequency, scope, and duration, and then they would communicate that back to the health home care manager so that they can update the plan of care so that the plan of care is reflective of all of the services the child is receiving and the frequency, scope, and duration for each.
Right, but as was noted on the grid earlier, the HCBS service provider would be working closely with the child and family in a person-centered way to identify what the goals would next. Yeah.
Yep.
So the goals that they identify with the child and family would then develop the service plan, and they would establish the goals. So that is the HCBS service provider's responsibility, is to outline the goals and objectives about what activities they're going to be doing to meet whatever needs the child and family have based on your person-centered planning and conversation with them.
There's a question, can service providers bill for service planning with HCBS? And I'm not sure what that exactly means, but what I will highlight, and I think it's important to know as we walk through the HCBS webinar series, is that if an agency is a health home care management agency but also provides HCBS as part of the services that that agency offers, they should follow the conflict-free case management requirements that are outlined in the health home manual. And the same provider should not be providing both of those services. So the care manager should not also be providing and billing for any of the HCBS. Those should be separate people within the agency who report to separate sections of that agency.
And in regards to specifically what I think the question is asking, HCBS services don't have different codes or activities broken out by different rates and different reimbursement structures. The HCBS services are the HCBS rates. So when you're meeting with the family to do the person-centered planning and the development of the service plan, you will bill the HCBS rate code and rate. So it's not broken out by different activities under the service. So absolutely you will be billing the HCBS service for the activities that you engage with the family to develop their service plan.
So we have a lot of duplicates, so we're just trying to find any unique questions that we're able to answer today that we haven't already.
Yeah. There's a couple questions in regards to whose responsibility is it to verify that the child is getting an IEP with vocational or employment services on it, or is engaged with Access VR for the same before pre-vocational services or support employment HCBS services could be provided. I think first and foremost, the care manager is responsible for having a full working knowledge of all of the services that the child is engaged in, whether it be Medicaid services or non-Medicaid services. So they would be hopefully asking those questions and getting that information. If a need is identified from the family for pre-vocational or supported employment services, the care manager, before making the referral, should be asking that family what services they're engaged in through their IEP, if they have one, or through Access VR, and verifying whether they're engaged with those services or not. And then making the referral for pre-vocational supported employment services. However, it would be important for the care manager and the provider to be communicating on that point, but the provider themselves should also verify that with the family and confirm that with the care manager before they should initiate services, just to be safe. So while the work should be done by the care manager prior to referral, the verification of that information, the responsibility is on the service provider.
There was a question asking about something I said about the CFTSS services for SSI children, and did that person hear correctly that they cannot bill fee-for-service for the 3 CFTSS that went live in January until July 1 of 2019? No, that's not what I meant. I don't know if that's what I said, but I hope that's not what I said. Providers should be billing fee-for-service Medicaid for OLP, CPST, and PSR for children who are SSI, even if they're enrolled in a managed care plan. If they're in a managed care plan and they are not SSI, providers should be billing the managed care plan. So I just want that to be very clear. On July 1st of 2019, all children who are enrolled in a managed care plan will have those services billed to the managed care plan. And then we got another question about, are all billing rates the same? No, all the billing rates are not the same. They're outlined in a spreadsheet on the DOH website, and we would encourage folks to look at that. But the services do not all have the same rates. The question was specifically asking, are the HCBS rates the same as case management rates? And no, they're not. Each service has its own rates that are listed in a spreadsheet on the Department of Health website. And I think we are just about out of time, so as a reminder, if we didn't get to your question today, we will certainly include it in the Q&A document. And as always, you can reach out to the state at any of the mailboxes that we've showed you here, and we'd be happy to answer your question. So I'll turn it back over to McTack to close out the webinar for today.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you again. Really appreciate you taking the time and answering the questions and presenting with us on these two services. As was mentioned multiple times, these both the recording and the presentation will be posted on the MCTAC website, and we look forward to you participating in our other service-specific webinars that are going to be continued to happen throughout the month of March. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you. Take care.